Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, a new report out from State Auditor Dave Bolick's office shows more than $111 million on base camp setup in western North Carolina after Hurricane Helene. Question is, did the state and then the federal government get a good return on their investment? We'll go through the more than 1,000-page report coming up. And good Wednesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple and easy to listen along there. Just search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning sponsored by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges you or your family, your business might be facing, lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. Back in late September of 2024, there was a massive weather event known as Hurricane Helene that left unimaginable amounts of devastation across western North Carolina. We've all seen the pictures, we've all seen the videos, we've all seen the unfortunate stories, killing more than 100 people just in the state of North Carolina alone, as that storm dumped an incredible amount of rain in the mountains of North Carolina. The insane amounts of wind and the ground being saturated caused thousands, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of trees to be toppled. You had areas where practically entire towns were washed away as water rushed down the hills and mountainsides. A very devastating storm, and arguably the most devastating storm that we have seen in North Carolina history, leaving the estimates at this point nearly $60 billion worth of damage, which puts it at the costliest natural disaster in North Carolina history in late September of 2024. And with that, there has been, over the last almost 2 years, and there will remain for years to come, a lot of recovery efforts in western North Carolina. And it's important to note as we dive into the details on a brand new report out from State Auditor Dave Bolick's office, a report that's more than 1,100 pages. There are different areas in which a storm like this and the recovery and the impact and the effects are felt. Right, you've got some of the pre-preparation for the storm, of which there frankly wasn't really a whole lot. I don't think many folks thought it was going to be as bad as it was. Then you have this immediate aftermath, right? You've got the storm. It starts impacting western North Carolina. Things go downhill and turn south very quickly. You've got these rivers that are very quickly overrunning their banks, washing out houses and entire towns, killing more than 100 people. That is during the storm. Then you've got this window, and it's a relatively short window that is the immediate aftermath, where for the first time, the winds and the rain stop. First responders, National Guard, law enforcement, fire, and EMS, they surge into the area and try and find individuals who are still missing, find people that are, maybe stuck in their attic or stuck in other areas, try and get them to safety. That's the immediate aftermath. And then you've got another little short window after that where, okay, the kind of the search and rescue stuff is done. There still might be unfortunately, some bodies that have not been found, but it's not an active search and rescue mission. That's a short window as well. And then you pretty quickly translate into this more long-term recovery. And I would say that starts probably within a few weeks of the storm impacting. I mean, the one nice thing about a hurricane, and there's not many nice things about hurricanes, but one of the nice things about a hurricane or a tornado or other natural disasters is they come and go for the most part pretty quickly, right? We saw some Pretty nasty weather across North Carolina last night. These storms, tornadoes and things, they spin up, they roll through the area at 30 or 40, 50 miles an hour for a severe thunderstorm or a tornado, and then they're gone. Now, that does not mean that there's not long-term impacts. That does not mean that communities are not impacted. They absolutely are, and it's a similar thing with hurricanes. While they're not moving 40 or 50 miles an hour, they get going. And within a day or so, the rain has stopped, the wind has stopped, and it's, back to some semblance of normalcy as it relates to the weather itself. So in the immediate aftermath of the storm, you have everybody surging into western North Carolina to try and recover and rescue as many people as possible. You have that short search and rescue period that takes place, this recovery mission that takes place shortly after that. And then within a couple of weeks, you begin the process of stepping back and saying, wow, this was an incredible storm, this unimaginable devastation. Let's go through the process and let's start the process of figuring out how to recover so many of these areas. And we've watched that play out over the last 2 years. We've watched the Department of Transportation work on rebuilding portions of the Blue Ridge Parkway and rebuilding roads and bridges and other sorts of roadways that were just completely inundated or in some cases completely wiped away from Hurricane Helene. You've got a lot of these local communities out in western North Carolina. You think of places like Lake Lure and Black Mountain and Swannanoa, Chimney Rock. The list kind of goes on and on. These areas that begin the process of rebuilding. This new report out from State Auditor Dave Bolick's office, what they're calling a rapid response report, is starting to raise questions about more than $111 million that was spent to operate 55 Hurricane Helene base camps and comfort stations after the storm. That's a pretty significant amount of money. Yes, the storm caused $60 billion, around $60 billion worth of damage. $111 million was spent in a relatively short amount of time, about 7 months or so, operating these 55 facilities. $111 million goes a long way. You talk about getting folks back in their homes. You talk about helping these very small municipalities, many of them no more than a couple thousand people in western North Carolina. $111 million goes a long way. In some cases, some of these towns and municipalities' budgets are 10, 15, 20, $30 million a year. You're talking about multiple years worth of their budget in this dollar amount announced and released as part of this report from the auditor's office. And the big issue that I see with this more than 1,100-page report is that the state of North Carolina Emergency Management, NCEM, which is a branch of the Department of Public Safety, DPS, paid fixed contract rates for services. Why is that an issue? Well, I can see in the immediate aftermath of the storm, again, when first responders are first surging into the area and you've got this ongoing search and rescue mission that is taking place as you're trying to recover as many people as possible. The problem with a paid fixed rate contract that goes on for months is, well, it's a fixed rate, meaning that if services that you were expecting to provide don't meet said numbers, well, you're still paying for it. That is one of the issues with a fixed rate contract. It works in some cases, it doesn't work in others. And unfortunately, the state was paying these fixed rate contracts for services such as meals, showers, laundry services, beds, which were essentially just cots, all of this without tracking how many of those services were actually used. And unfortunately, this didn't just go on for a couple of weeks, which you probably could say, all right, unimaginable disaster in western North Carolina, something that we've never seen before. This stuff's expensive. We're really not worried about the cost. And I agree with this. You're really not worried about the cost right after the storm has blown through and you're trying to make sure that you can recover and get as many people to safety as possible. That's not the gripe here. That's not the concern here. This is a situation that lingered for months. And in the case of one of the largest base camps in Swannanoa, this went on for 7 months. It is fair to say, and I think safe to say, not to minimize any of the devastation, any of the impact in Western North Carolina, that 7 months after the storm, things had begun the process of normalizing in some way, shape, or form. Yes, communities are still devastated. Yes, people were still not back in their homes, but there was no active threat 7 months after the storm. And when you're paying a fixed rate contract for that amount of time, you end up with a bill, in this case, that North Carolina Emergency Management did, which was over $111 million, a very sizable amount of money. We are continuing with details out of a brand new report out of the North Carolina State Auditor's Office. That is Dave Bolick and his team starting to ask some questions about $111 million that was spent to operate 55 Hurricane Helene base camps and comfort stations in Western North Carolina. The big issue with the report is no metrics available and a fixed rate being paid to a group called SLSCO Ltd. That just their acronym, they were SLS. That is the Texas-based disaster response contractor that North Carolina Emergency Management contracted in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Helene. And when it was all said and done, when all the accounting was said and done, the state ended up paying more than $111 million for these services. These facilities supported first responders, utility crews, state employees, and disaster survivors across Western North Carolina. And the state auditor, and Dave Bolick, was pretty clear in the report that this was not intended to question the need for emergency response, but instead highlight the importance of evaluating costs once the immediate crisis is passed. And that's the key point. Nobody is sitting here and splitting hairs on, well, how much money did you spend the first week of August, which was just literally days after Hurricane Helene affected Western North Carolina? No, I don't think so. The second week of August. Hell, I'll give you the entire month of August, a full month after the storm has passed. The questions are not there. It's as you get into the spring of 2025, the storm impacted in September of 2024, you get into the early parts of 2025, and you still have hundreds of thousands of dollars a day being spent to operate these facilities. That is a point where it is probably time, and I would argue it is in fact time, to take a little bit of a step back and say, hey, are we getting a good return on our investment? This is what the state auditor had to say in a press release associated with this report. He said, in part, these base camps were an essential service in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Now that we are in the long-term rebuilding phase of recovery and knowing that future emergencies will strike, absolutely the case, it is essential that we, as a state, have discussions on the associated costs. $111 million is no small total. In the absence of key metrics, raises a clear need to assess how these camps are utilized and consider the full return on the expense. And this is an appropriate exercise to have. This is not meant to minimize the more than 100 people that lost their lives. This is not meant, I don't read this report as something that is hypercritical of North Carolina Emergency Management. I don't read this report as something that is hypercritical of SLS, the contractor that they used, or even the Department of Public Safety. The storm has passed. It's been almost 2 years now. The state spent $111 million operating 55 base camps with some crazy high dollar figures for certain things. It's fair to look back and say, was this a good use of money? Was this a good, effective use of dollars? Was this a good ROI, return on the investment of not just a couple $1 million, which obviously is still a large sum, but more than $111 million. According to the audit itself, North Carolina Emergency Management paid a total of $111,067,464 over roughly 7 months, which averaged more than $500,000 per day. When it was all said and done, the state, through North Carolina Emergency Management, was spending a whopping $516,593 per day. $500,000, more than $500,000 per day to operate these sites. That is a sizable amount of money. The largest individual site, located in Swannanoa, accounted for more than $27 million in expenses. The auditor's office released an individual report on Swannanoa back in June of last year. I remember covering that, as that center operated for 189 days at the cost of more than $27.4 million, with an average daily cost at that single site, to operate one site, $145,000 per day. That is a large sum of money. Think about all of the homes that could be rebuilt in Western North Carolina if the state was spending $145,000 per day to get people back in their homes. And that's an important metric to look at, because we're not talking about a couple of bucks here and there. We're not talking about a couple $100,000 over a few weeks. No, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. Very large totals. And auditors found here that many of those costs were based on the anticipated number of people at each location and what they were expecting to have rather than actual usage. And again, there's a clear differentiator here. In the immediate aftermath, as I mentioned, this immediate search and recovery, the days and the first few weeks following the storm, I'm not really worried about were metrics being tracked. Total chaos taking place. You're trying to recover people from their homes. You're trying to get them to safety. I don't care about that stuff for the first couple of weeks. But as you get months removed from the storm, I think it is a fair exercise to say, okay, we were anticipating this site having 1,000 people per day. Let's just throw out some random number. We were expecting this site to have 1,000 people a day, and we're stocked for 1,000 people a day, right? This company, SLS, is a disaster recovery firm. I would argue they're pretty competent and capable of determining what kind of supplies, what kind of support is needed to support 1,000 people. So that's what the plan is. That's what is built in, and that's what you say, all right, that's our goal. However, 8 weeks following the storm, if you find out that that site is only serving 150 people a day or 200 people a day, hell, even 500 people a day, and you're anticipating still serving 1,000, that's a problem, because you're way overspending on a facility, on a site that probably doesn't need to be needed. And some of these totals and some of these dollar amounts are insanely high, according to the report here from the auditor's office. For example, when all was said and done, the state spent $16 million on sinks and showers. $16,223,129.11. So the state spent more than $6.5 million on meals and meal support, $6.3 million on labor, $6.1 million on cots. The report says beds. These were largely cots, $6.1 million. More than $5.1 million on laundry services, washing clothes and towels and things of that nature. These are very high and very large dollar amounts. Were they needed in the immediate short term after the storm? Again, not really worried there. But how about as we went through the months of September and then got into October and then, of course, transitioned into November and December? Was all of that stuff needed 2, 3, 4 months after the storm passed? And unfortunately, according to details out of this new report from the state auditor's office, we don't know, because none of the metrics were tracked. North Carolina Emergency Management and their contractor in SLS, who got paid $111 million to operate these facilities, don't have any numbers, don't have any metrics. So we can't go back and look at this and say, was this the best use? Could we have done this for $80 million? Could we have done it for $70 million? We don't know, because nothing was being tracked. We'll get into more on this report coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about and thank the Law Group here at Wilmington for their continued support of the program, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group. Since 2003, Melissa Gott and her team over at the Law Group and their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong criminal defense, no matter the issue, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. Quick reminder, coming up tonight at 7 o'clock, we will be hosting our monthly Patreon hangout. For those that support the show over at patreon.com/Nick Craig, check your email there. I'll send out another reminder a little bit later on this morning. We'll be chatting about all the news of the day, which will probably be a lot of the coverage of Anthony Fauci, who is set to appear in front of the United States Senate today. We'll be talking about that and all of the other issues impacting North Carolina and the nation. 7 o'clock tonight, our Nick Craig Show monthly hangout, patreon.com/Nick Craig. Always a great time chatting with everybody. Looking forward to doing that tonight at 7 p.m. All right, we'll grab a quick break. On the other side, we'll get into more details on this brand new report out from North Carolina State Auditor Dave Bolick's office as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this Wednesday morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Wednesday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we continue our coverage today of a brand new more than 1,100 page report out from North Carolina State Auditor Dave Bolick in his office, showing more than $111 million being spent by North Carolina Emergency Management to operate 55 Hurricane Helene base camps and comfort stations following the devastation and the destruction left in the wake of Hurricane Helene. That storm affected western North Carolina in late September of 2024. killing more than 108 people across the state, leveling entire communities and towns, washing away bridges and roads and water systems, unimaginable devastation in western North Carolina. However, as we approach the 2-year mark of that storm coming up here in just a couple of months, and as we've seen so much progress in western North Carolina, with areas like Chimney Rock and Lake Lure getting back to some semblance of normal, reopening portions of their town, welcoming visitors back to western North Carolina. The Blue Ridge Parkway in large part completely opened through the mountains as well. We are now looking back, and this report is looking back on this $111 million that was spent over the span of about 7 months by North Carolina Emergency Management to operate these 55 base camps or comfort stations. And one of the concerning things in this report is that there are very little metrics to go by, if any metrics at all to go by, to determine whether this $111 million was well spent. Right? You would need some sort of supporting evidence, some sort of supporting data. Here's the thing. It very well could be the case that $111 million needed to be spent to operate these facilities, to operate these camps in western North Carolina. But unfortunately, because North Carolina Emergency Management and their contractor in SLS, because they didn't track any of the metrics, because they were doing everything on these fixed rate contracts, there's no way to know that, right? If a facility was supposed to hold 1,000 people and only 500 were there, obviously you were spending twice what you needed to operate that facility, to operate that base camp. There could have been 1,000 people there, but we don't know because that data was not tracked. Nobody at Emergency Management, nobody at SLS thought about looking at that data, looking at that information and saying, hey, we're supplying food for 500 or 600 people and there's only 150 people here. Maybe that's a problem. And obviously from the contractor's standpoint, it's a fixed rate contract. I'm not surprised they don't care, but I hoped that North Carolina Emergency Management would, because in the immediate short term here, this was taxpayer money before it was, and it still is taxpayer money. However, it was reimbursed by FEMA. So according to the audit, more than $111 million spent there. Getting into some more detail on the report. Meals, for example, were billed at a flat rate based on facilities serving either 155 people, 250 people, or 750 people. That pricing translated to an effective cost of $41.67 per meal, per person, per day. Multiple meals per day. $41 plus per meal. That was regardless of how many meals were actually served or eaten. That was a fixed rate price throughout the entirety of the contract. The report states that neither SLS nor Emergency Management tracked actual meal consumption, and invoices were not adjusted based on the number of meals provided. The audit found a similar lack of tracking for other services. Laundry charges were based on anticipated demand rather than the number of laundry loads. I mean, something that you can relatively easily track. How many loads of laundry did we do? How many meals did we actually serve? How many meals were actually eaten? None of that was the case. Shower usage, restroom usage, hand washing activity, none of those things were tracked either, because those metrics were not required under the state's disaster contract. And that is, I think, why in large reason you end up with some of these eye-popping numbers. For example, the state spent $16.2 million on sinks and showers at these facilities over the span of months that these sites were open. $16.2 million for people to wash their hands and take a shower. Obviously, yes, that stuff is important. Nobody is saying it's not important. But did it need to be $16 million? Could it have been cut in half? Could it be $5, $6, $7, $8, $9 million? We don't know because none of that data is available. None of those metrics were tracked by anybody to look back 2 years later and say, did we overspend on this? Did we spend too much money operating these facilities? We don't know. We won't ever know. And some of the prices for some of these things that were provided are nuts. Taking a look at this chart from the audit, an 8-stall restroom trailer had a weekly rate of $41,400 when all was said and done. That 8-stall restroom trailer cost the state of North Carolina more than $776,000, $776,000 for these 8-stall restroom trailers at a rate of $41,000 per week. Again, I'm not upset that people had the ability to use and get access to clean running water. That's not the gripe. That's not the concern. That's not the issue. Was this the best, most effective way to do it at $41,400 per week? My gut reaction, and unfortunately I can't back this up with any data because it doesn't exist. Unfortunately, my reaction is probably not, because that's such a high dollar amount. 10-stall restrooms, $82,800 per week. Some of these other facilities with, again, this is dealing with restrooms and portable porta potties and trailers and things like that. 10-stall restroom trailer, $124,200 per week. Wild dollar figures, wild dollar amounts in this report with no metrics to determine, was this trailer used by anybody? Or was this trailer rented because they thought they were going to have a whole bunch of people at this site? It didn't materialize, and this 8-stall restroom trailer essentially sat vacant for weeks on end, because there's a real possibility that that was the case. That's what happens when you have this fixed rate contract and are not keeping track of any of the numbers. When you're not changing some of the invoices and changing what you need based on the services that are actually required. You have a situation where you've got these very expensive, I think most folks would argue spending $41,400 a week on a restroom trailer is expensive. Now, that expense may be justified, but we don't know. That's the problem. That's the issue. This is something that is an interesting issue as well. Labor costs were another major expense, and this one is a lot harder for emergency management and SLS to run away from. General staff at the site, so these are just individuals working at the site, cleaning the restrooms, making sure that the food is prepped and ready, helping the first responders and utility workers out if they need something. Those individuals were billed at $87.30 per hour. Pretty hefty per hour dollar amount there. Pod managers were making $145.50 per hour, and site coordinators, take a listen to this, site coordinators at these 55 locations, it's not clear how many of them actually had these positions, but site coordinators pulled down a whopping $12,100 per week. Try that on for size. Making more than $12,000 as a site coordinator per week. Overtime, which was frequently paid to individuals working in these sites, increased the hourly rates of the general staff workers to more than $130 per hour, and those pod managers making more than $218 per hour working at these facilities. The report also noted that North Carolina Emergency Management did not have formal job descriptions for those positions, leaving the qualifications up to the contractor. You're paying somebody $12,100 per week to be a site coordinator at one of these 55 base camps across Western North Carolina. I think it is a fair question to ask, what is the job description? What is this person responsible for? They're making $12,000 per week, not $12,000 a year, not $12,000 a month, $12,000 per week. What are they doing? What are their responsibilities? How can you determine what exactly they're responsible for? And so you're looking at these incredibly high dollar figures. And again, the question, if you had these sites packed to the brim, you could say, oh, well, of course we needed these general staff people. There was so much work going on. If the sites didn't have that many people there, you were paying individuals $80 to $145 an hour that they may have not had any work to do. They may have just been sitting there because the facilities weren't at capacity, or there weren't, frankly, that many people there. But again, we don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, because there is zero in terms of metrics. And of course, I'm just going to be blunt about it. If you're working one of these positions and you can make $145.50 an hour as a pod manager and you don't have any work to do, I'm not going to fault you for sitting there and twiddling your thumbs. You're making $145 an hour. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and claim that you're going to blow the whistle on yourself. It's a very lucrative job. It's a very lucrative thing if you can hold on to it for even just a couple of weeks, hell, a couple of months. So those individuals aren't going to self-report and say, hey, you're paying me $145.50 per hour and I'm really not doing anything. Nobody in the right mind is going to do that. You're going to take your hourly rate, you're going to take your paycheck, and you're going to go home. Or in this case, to continue to live at the site, because many of these folks are from outside of Western North Carolina. So they're not going to self-report, and I don't fault them for that at all. That's what's being paid. You're told to be there for however many hours a week. Is it 40? Is it 50, 60, however many hours a week? I can't fault those people at all. I put the fault on emergency management and by extension, their contractor and SLS for not making sure that these things were being done effectively. And again, I'll continue to state this. There is a difference between the immediate aftermath, the weeks following this storm, late September into portions of early October, the first week or two of early October, 3 weeks, maybe the entire month of October. You get a little bit of a pass there. But once you get into November, once you get into December and January and February, the storm it's still, quote unquote, impacting the area. The storm has been gone for months. There's no, people are rescued. Yes, there's still devastation. Yes, everybody's trying to pick up the pieces. Absolutely. But there's no immediate threat. You're not conducting search and rescue missions in February of 2025 for a storm that hit in late September. That's not going on anymore. Yes, there's still a lot of work. Yes, utility crews are still stringing up power lines. All that stuff is true. Were these sites being effectively utilized? Unfortunately, your guess is as good as mine. In rounding out the conversation on this brand new report from North Carolina State Auditor Dave Bolick in his office, showing that North Carolina paid a Texas-based disaster relief company more than $111 million to operate 55 Hurricane Helene base camps in western North Carolina following that storm's devastation in September of 2024. The report arguing that there were no metrics that were provided by emergency management or their contractor in SLS to determine whether that $111 million was a prudent and good use of taxpayer dollars, sounding the alarm that, hey, I read through a quote from Auditor Bolick back a little while ago, earlier in the show, and he said, there's going to be more disasters. Unfortunately, there's going to be more heartache. There's going to be more natural disasters and storms that affect the state of North Carolina. Some will be in the east, some will be in the west. And so we want to look back at this. We're now almost 2 years removed from the storm and say, did we do this in the most efficient manner? Did we need to spend $111 million? Maybe we needed to spend less. Maybe we needed to spend more. I don't know. But again, you can't determine any of that when you have no numbers and no metrics to go on. And that's the gripe. That's the concern. That's the issue that the auditor's office is raising in this more than 1,100-page report is we don't have any data here. We can't say definitively whether this was a bad use of taxpayer dollars, a good use of taxpayer dollars, or if more taxpayer dollars needed to be spent. We can't determine that because there's no data available. All we have is these fixed rate invoices that said we were paying people like site coordinators $12,100 per week, which averages, if you made that throughout the entire year, more than $624,000. We paid general staff overtime rates of $130 an hour. We can't determine whether those were good expenditures. We just can't do that. And so emergency management responded to this report. No surprise, it's questioning whether how some of these things were done, and the response was very defensive from Jeffrey Smythe, who is the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety. Emergency management sits under the umbrella of a DPS here in North Carolina, and I just wanted to read through his response. It's not very long, but this is the response. North Carolina Emergency Management received the final rapid response special report titled Hurricane Helene Base Camps on the 30th of June, 2026, and appreciates the opportunity to provide a response to the assessment. North Carolina Emergency Management and members of the State Emergency Response Team, known as CERT, S-E-R-T, worked tirelessly during the response and recovery phase of Tropical Storm Helene to support life safety and life sustainment operations throughout western North Carolina. Through CERT, over 3,300 search and rescue personnel, almost 1,000 law enforcement officials, nearly 1,000 firefighters, and over 3,900 National Guard and active duty military personnel supported the response to this catastrophic event. These responders came from across North Carolina and from 39 states to support the response. Additionally, over 7,900 utility crews from out of state and internationally supported the power restoration efforts. These response teams, incident management personnel, and infrastructure restoration teams were needed to support life safety and life sustainment missions and response to Tropical Storm Helene. Deploying and supporting this number of resources and personnel into a disaster area requires significant logistical operations to house, feed, and support response efforts. As all incidents begin and end locally in North Carolina Emergency Management and CERT are focused on supporting the local response needs and addressing gaps or barriers. This is to ensure transparent and efficient procurement measures are in place, pre-disaster contracts are maintained to ensure necessary goods or services are secured for potential disaster deployments. Due to the critical nature of emergency response, especially in catastrophic incidents, disaster contracts by their nature can be expensive, but are necessary actions to take with life safety is concerned. The obligation of North Carolina Emergency Management and CERT is to support life safety and life sustainment operations for disaster survivors and impacted communities. Each of the invoices included, and there's literally thousands of them, each of the invoices included in this special report have been reviewed by FEMA under the Public Assistance Program and completed multiple federal reviews and validation steps. Based on the FEMA review, each of the invoices and associated costs have been deemed necessary and appropriately procured, classifying them as emergency protective measures in the Public Assistance Program. These costs have been reimbursed to the state at a cost share of 100%, meaning that the federal government covered the entire $111 million tab. After reviewing the draft report and recommendations, North Carolina Emergency Management will continue to make disaster procurements in line with national best practices, FEMA Public Assistance Program guidelines, and other applicable federal or state requirements. While capturing the specific number of meals, showers, or beds used may be helpful in day-to-day commodity procurement, disaster procurement is based on supporting the needs of local communities, of our CERT partners, and of emergency responders in a time of significant stress and when life safety and sustainment is the priority. North Carolina Emergency Management is dedicated and focused on ensuring the right resources are available when needed to respond to catastrophic incidents and to support the North Carolinians we all serve. Signed, Jeffrey Smythe, the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety. Not really in love with this response. They keep going back to, in this case, it was really stressful, life safety and life sustainment. Absolutely. But nobody's questioning that. We're not talking about what was going on in early October. We weren't talking about what was going on 2, 3, 4 weeks following the storm. What we're talking about is as we got into November, December, January, and February of the following year. I don't think it is accurate to say that in February of 2025 that life safety and sustainment operations were ongoing. You were 4+ months, 5 months removed from the storm at that point. You were in the process of recovery. Absolutely. You were in the process of still providing support. Sure. But the storm affected the state in late September. There was no active threat of the storm in November, December, January, February. That was well gone, months removed by that point. And this justification that FEMA looked at these invoices, the federal government, who we know is totally incapable of managing money in an efficient manner, totally incapable of being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, that's not a good justification for me either. Oh, because FEMA said that we could spend $111 million and didn't question any of our invoices, we're good to go. That doesn't help me sleep well at night. That does not help me put my head on the pillow and go, my taxpayer dollars are being well spent. We know that the federal government is totally incapable of doing this. We know that they don't care at all if they use taxpayer dollars in an inappropriate or a not appropriate fashion. We know that that's the case. These metrics should have been tracked. These metrics need to be tracked going forward. I understand that you're talking about, and believe me, I understand this. I get that we have, in the immediate aftermath of a storm, a very treacherous, a very stressful, an unimaginable time in the immediate aftermath of a storm like this. None of that changes. None of that goes away. The question that I will leave you with, and the question that this audit essentially leaves me with, more than 1,100 pages, was this a good use of dollars? And to say that the federal government paid for it and that the state isn't on the hook for it doesn't matter, because it's still my money. It's still your money, whether it's the state picking up the tab or whether it's FEMA. It's still taxpayer dollars when the rubber meets the road. This is an important report. This is an important conversation. This is what it means to make sure that government is accountable. And unfortunately, North Carolina Emergency Management and Jeff Smythe at DPS seem unwilling to look at those metrics. Brush this off and say, oh, well, it may be helpful to track this day-to-day stuff, but disaster procurement isn't done like that. We just don't do things like that. That's not a good response for me at all. More detail on this report, I'll throw the links in the show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig, or you can read it over at carolinajournal.com. I wrote the story over there. The headline, Audit NC paid $111 million for Helene base camps without tracking key services. All right, that's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the program. Don't forget that we've got our Patreon hangout coming up tonight at 7 o'clock. Check your email inbox for that. Look forward to chatting with everybody at patreon.com/Nick Craig. And thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. LawGroupNC.com or 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app and heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.